What a crowd, what a crowd. Looks are not that important. It's underneath what counts, soul, depth. That's what's important, not looks. But how many times you take a walk in the street, you see a tall, handsome man walking arm in arm with a short, fat, ugly girl. I never saw that. Did you ever see that? I never saw that, you know. I thought I saw that, you know.
There are very few comedians in history who could walk onto a stage, open their mouth, and within seconds have an entire room completely in the palm of their hand. Rodney Dangerfield was one of those rare people. What made him special was not just that he was funny, it was the way he was funny. The speed, the rhythm, the deadpan face, the loosened tie, the bulging eyes. Every single part of the package worked together to create something that nobody before him had ever quite pulled off, and nobody after him has ever been able to fully replicate. He took the most ordinary parts of life, the small humiliations, the everyday frustrations, the little moments where nothing goes your way, and he turned them into rapid-fire jokes that hit one after another without ever letting you breathe. And the incredible thing is that every single one of those jokes landed. He did not have misses. He had an unbroken chain of punchlines that kept escalating until the room was completely gone. Before we get into the genius of Rodney Dangerfield and break down what made his comedy so uniquely powerful, if you enjoy content that celebrates the legends of entertainment and digs into what actually made them great, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. We are building a community of people who love great comedy, great storytelling, and the kind of honest appreciation for real talent that you do not always find online. Every subscriber helps this channel grow and helps us keep making this kind of content. So if you want more of this, join us right now and let us get into one of the greatest comedians who ever lived. Rodney Dangerfield did not just tell jokes, he built a world. And in that world, absolutely everything was working against him. His wife did not respect him, his kids did not respect him, his doctor did not respect him, his own father did not respect him. The neighborhood he grew up in was trying to kill him. His body was falling apart, his marriage was a disaster, and through all of it, Rodney stood there in his suit, with his tie slightly undone, tugging at his collar, looking directly at the audience with those wide, panicked eyes, and delivering punchline after punchline about how thoroughly and completely life had failed to treat him with any basic human dignity. That was the act, that was the formula, and it was pure genius. One of the things that made Rodney so brilliant was his timing, not just the speed, which was extraordinary on its own, but the rhythm. He had a machine gun delivery that could fire 4 or 5 jokes in the span of 30 seconds without any of them stepping on each other. Each joke was its own complete thought, perfectly constructed, with the setup short and the punchline immediate. He never lingered, he never padded, he never explained. He would deliver a punchline, let the laugh roll for exactly the right amount of time, and then hit you with the next one before you had fully recovered from the first. It was relentless in the best possible way. Take the way he talked about his childhood. He did not ease you into it with some long story about where he grew up or what his parents were like. He just hit you immediately. He talked about how no one showed up to the custody battle between his parents after their divorce. Just that image, 2 parents so indifferent that neither of them even bothered to show up to fight over their own child, was delivered in one sentence and was somehow both completely absurd and perfectly timed. He followed it immediately by talking about how his family sent him to a child psychiatrist for 4 years, and then clarifying that it was a child psychiatrist, not an adult one, and that the kid had not helped him at all. Each detail built on the last, each addition made the picture slightly more ridiculous, and the whole thing moved so fast that you were laughing before your brain had fully processed what he had said. His relationship with his mother was a recurring target. He talked about how she never breastfed him because she liked him as a friend. Just that one line, delivered completely straight, is a perfect example of how Rodney worked. The setup is implied rather than stated. The punchline reframes the situation in the most unexpected possible direction, and the image it creates, a mother treating her newborn baby like a casual acquaintance she does not want to get too close to, is so bizarre and yet so consistent with the persona Rodney had built that it lands completely. His doctor, the fictional Dr. Vinnie Boombach, appeared throughout Rodney's material as another figure who delivered bad news without any warmth or comfort. Rodney would go in for a checkup and ask something perfectly reasonable, like whether his heart was strong enough for certain activities, and the answer he would get back would be delivered in the most matter-of-fact, utterly unhelpful way possible. The joke was never about the doctor being cruel. It was about Rodney existing in a world where even the professionals who were supposed to help him could not resist joining in on the general theme of his life, which was that nothing was ever going to go quite right for him. The material about his wife was some of his most beloved. He built an entire alternate universe around his marriage, one where his wife was completely uninterested in him, where their intimate life had essentially evaporated, and where even the most basic expectations of a shared domestic existence had somehow collapsed. He talked about how when he got into bed, his wife disappeared, as if the act of him arriving was itself enough to make her vanish. He talked about moments of closeness where, instead of connection, there was just mutual confusion and disappointment on both sides. And he delivered all of it with that expression of genuine bewilderment, as if he could not quite believe that this was the situation he had found himself in, even after all these years. What made the wife material work was that it never felt mean-spirited. Rodney was not presenting himself as a victim of a bad person. He was presenting himself as a man who had somehow, through no entirely clear fault of his own, ended up in a marriage that made absolutely no sense, and who had decided that the only reasonable response was to talk about it as honestly and as rapidly as possible in front of as many people as would listen. The laughs came from recognition and absurdity in equal measure, because most people in a long relationship have had at least one moment where things felt slightly ridiculous, even if never quite to the degree that Rodney described. His father was portrayed as a man who had essentially opted out of the entire concept of parental warmth. Every story about his father followed the same basic structure. His father would be faced with a situation that called for some minimal display of love or support, and instead would do something that made it abundantly clear that his son was more or less an afterthought. He talked about how when he was kidnapped, his father was sent a piece of his finger as proof and asked for more before he would consider paying anything. He talked about how his father used to take him to the zoo in the hope that his real parents might come forward to claim him. He talked about games of tag where his father would drive. Each of these stories added another layer to the portrait of a man who had somehow raised a child while remaining essentially indifferent to that child's existence. And Rodney delivered every single one of them with the same expression of someone reporting back from a situation they still had not fully made peace with. The jokes about his children followed a similar but slightly different pattern. Where his parents were cold, his kids were sharp. They had somehow absorbed enough of the world's general attitude toward Rodney that they were able to deliver cutting remarks of their own without even trying. He talked about telling his son that someday he would have children of his own, only for the son to respond that so would Rodney. He talked about explaining the facts of life to his kid and having the kid respond with information about Rodney's wife and the butcher that Rodney had not been previously aware of. And there was the moment with his daughter, where he asked her what she wanted to be when she grew up, and she looked at his wife and said she wanted to be single. Each of these jokes positioned Rodney as the least respected person in his own household, somehow outmaneuvered by children who had barely started their lives. The neighborhood material gave Rodney's world a physical dimension. He lived somewhere so rough that ordinary interactions carried the constant threat of danger. He talked about a mugger who pulled a knife on him that turned out to have butter on it, which told you everything you needed to know about the caliber of criminal activity in his area. He talked about a peephole in his front door through which an attacker managed to grab him before he had even opened it. He talked about leaving every light on in his apartment, putting the radio on, and leaving a gnome on the door saying he was inside, only to come home and find he had still been robbed, with the burglar leaving his own notes saying he had looked everywhere for him. The absurdity of these scenarios was the point. Rodney did not live in a world where things made sense. He lived in a world where even the laws of cause and effect seemed to have decided to work against him specifically. His health and body image material had the same quality of a man quietly stunned by the ongoing failures of his own physical existence. He talked about trying to lose weight and finding that every attempt at dieting somehow ended in a different kind of disaster. He tried jogging and kept running into restaurants. He tried a rice diet and spent the week between meals folding his shirts out of habit.
His wife kept putting him on different diets, and none of them worked in any meaningful way. He acknowledged his appearance with the same unflinching honesty he brought to everything else, talking about how ugly he was in terms that were so extreme they became funny rather than sad. He talked about sticking his head out the window and getting arrested for mooning. He talked about showing up to a freak show and being let in for free. And throughout all of it, he maintained that expression of a man who had long ago accepted that his relationship with the physical world was simply going to be adversarial.
What set Rodney apart from other comedians who worked with similar themes, the put-upon everyman, the self-deprecating loser, the guy life keeps kicking, was the combination of pace and commitment. He never broke. He never winked at the audience to let them know he was in on the joke. He delivered every single line with complete sincerity, as if he were reporting genuinely upsetting facts about his existence rather than performing for a room full of people. That sincerity was what made the laughs so big. You were not laughing at someone performing sadness. You were laughing at someone who seemed to have genuinely accepted that this was just how things were going to be for him. His appearances on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson became legendary, partly because of how Carson responded to him. Carson was one of the most controlled and composed hosts in the history of television, but Rodney had a way of getting genuine, uncontrolled laughter out of him. Watching Carson break completely in the middle of a Rodney set was itself part of the entertainment, because it confirmed for the audience that what they were watching was truly funny in a way that went beyond performance. Even someone who had seen thousands of comedians and rarely lost his composure could not hold it together when Rodney was on a roll. The bits where Rodney stayed in character, even outside the formal stand-up portion of the appearance, were particularly special. He would move from a prepared set into what looked like casual conversation with Carson, and somehow the jokes just kept coming, as if the act and the person were completely inseparable. He would improvise in the same rapid-fire style, turning whatever Carson said into another setup for another punchline, never losing the rhythm, never stopping to think. It created the impression of someone who did not so much perform comedy as simply exist in a state of constant comedy, where every moment of every day was another opportunity for the universe to demonstrate that Rodney Dangerfield did not get no respect. That phrase, "no respect," became his signature for a reason. It was not just a tagline, it was the organizing principle of an entire comedic worldview. Every joke he ever told was ultimately a variation on that same theme. The specific target changed. Sometimes it was his wife, sometimes his parents, sometimes his doctor, sometimes his neighborhood, sometimes his own body. But the underlying experience was always the same. A man moving through a world that consistently, thoroughly, and without any apparent malice refused to treat him as someone worthy of basic consideration. And rather than being tragic, it was hilarious, because Rodney played it with such genuine bewilderment and such unstoppable energy that you could not help but laugh. Rodney Dangerfield created something genuinely original. He built a persona so complete and so consistent that it became its own universe. He perfected a delivery style that has influenced every rapid-fire comedian who came after him. And he did it all while looking and sounding like nobody else who had ever stood on a comedy stage. He was not supposed to be a movie star. He was not supposed to be a mainstream icon. He was a guy who had spent decades struggling in smaller rooms before finally breaking through, and when he did break through, he arrived fully formed, with a style so polished and a persona so complete that it felt like he had always been there. If you enjoyed this appreciation of one of the true legends of stand-up comedy, please subscribe to this channel and hit that like button. We are working to build something special here, a community that celebrates the performers who actually changed the art form. Leave a comment below about your favorite Rodney Dangerfield joke, or the moment that first made you understand just how special he was. And we will see you in the next one.